The key had lived on my keyring for 20 years before it ever opened a door. Last month, I stood on a porch in Grand Rapids, Michigan, slid that little brass key into a lock, and felt it turn for the first time in my life. Here is what you need to know before I tell you how I got there. For almost 4 years, I paid my mother $400 a month toward debts my dead grandmother supposedly left behind. Those debts never existed, not $1 of them. There is a document sitting in a county courthouse with my signature on it. A signature giving away a house I never knew I owned. I did not write that signature. I was not in the room. I was not in the state. And here is the part my mother never saw coming. Today, I read property records for a living. I am a licensed title examiner. I find broken chains of ownership, forged deeds, stamps that should never have touched paper. I find them for strangers. 40 hours a week. Last spring, for the first time, the broken title on my desk was mine, and I did what I do. I followed the paper all the way home. My name is Dana Whitlock. I am 34 years old, and if you have ever been the person in your family who is counted on for everything and counted as nothing, if you have ever paid a bill just to keep the peace and wondered later what exactly you were paying for, I want you to stay with me, because this story is for you. Subscribe if you are new here, and do one thing for me before we start. If you have ever covered a debt that was never really yours, type the word owed in the comments. I read every one. Some of you will understand the ending of this story before I even get there. To understand the key, you have to come back with me. All of this turns on one night, the night I walked out of my mother's kitchen and never went back. Everything in this story happens either before that night or after it, and I will keep you oriented the whole way. We start almost 4 years before that night, on a cold morning in January, when my grandmother Evelyn died in her sleep in the house on Alder Street. Grandma Evelyn was the only person in my family who ever wrote things down. She kept a garden, a coffee can of loose screws, and a habit of recording every borrowed dollar and every returned favor in little notebooks. She bought 3 at a time from the drugstore. When I was 14, she put a brass key in my hand at her kitchen table. House key. Her house. 214 Alder Street. She folded my fingers over it and said, "So you always have somewhere to go." I put it on my keyring next to my bike lock. Key, and I never took it off. Remember, that key, it is the reason we are all here. She was 81 when she died. I was 23, working the front desk at a dental office, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a window that faced a parking structure. The funeral was on a Saturday. My mother, Carol, ran it the way she ran everything, like a project with her name at the top of it. My mother worked as the office manager at a real estate brokerage on the east side of town, and she had a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like it had already been approved by someone above you. At the funeral home, she handed me the guest book and a pen and told me to sign the family page. I signed it. She looked at the page, frowned, and said the pen had skipped. "Sign it again," she said, "right below, nice and clear. People will look at this book for years." So I signed my name twice, one above the other, as close to identical as a person can sign. I thought nothing of it. I want you to hold on to that guest book because it comes back, and when it comes back, it will make your stomach drop the way it dropped mine. 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table with a folder she never actually opened. She told me Grandma had died with almost nothing. The house on Alder Street, she said, was tangled up in what she called old debts. Medical bills, a reverse arrangement with the bank, back taxes. She waved her hand through the list like she was brushing crumbs off the table. The estate owes more than it has, she said. Your brother and I are handling it, so it doesn't touch you kids. And then she said the sentence I would hear for the next 20 years. The sentence that ran our family. Like a company motto, we keep it in the family. No lawyers. No fighting. No airing things out. We keep it in the family. I believed her. I was 23. I was grieving. And she was my mother. Why would I have asked to see a single page of that folder? Keep that question in mind. It cost me $17,600. And that was the cheap part. 1 month after the funeral, so still almost 4 years before the night I walked out. The payment started. My mother explained it in her office voice. The estate had what she called a monthly shortfall. The family was covering it together until the debts were settled. My share was $400 a month. My brother, Marcus, was supposedly paying his share too. Marcus is 3 years older than me. He ran a small heating and cooling business out of a rented garage back then. 2 vans and a logo. His wife designed. I never once saw him write a check at that table. But I was told he paid. And telling was as far as anyone in my family ever got. With proof. I paid. February, March, April. I paid on the 1st of every month in a bank transfer. My mother set up herself on my phone while I held it, which should have told me something. And because I am my grandmother's granddaughter, I wrote every payment down. I bought a green drugstore notebook, the same kind. Grandma bought 3 at a time. And on the first page I wrote, Grandma's debts, and under it the date and the amount, $400. $400. $400. Line after line, month after month. My mother laughed at the notebook. Once, she actually laughed. She said, Sweetheart, nobody is auditing you. Remember, the green book. My mother is going to meet it again, in a room with lawyers in it. And she is not going to laugh. Now, if you are listening to this doing something else, folding laundry, driving, I want to make the next part impossible to miss. Because it is the crime. And it happened while I was standing in line at a pharmacy, in another state. Stay with me. This is the part that they never wanted anyone to find. About 2 months after the funeral, in the middle of March, my mother called and asked me to mail her a photocopy of my driver's license for the estate paperwork. She said, the lawyer needs identification for all the heirs. Even though there is nothing to inherit, it is just procedure. I was in Chicago that whole week, helping my college roommate move apartments, sleeping on her floor, carrying boxes down 3 flights of stairs. I mailed the copy from a post office on Ashland Avenue. I even have the receipt, because the green book had turned me into a person who keeps receipts. I remember being mildly annoyed at the cost of certified mail. That photocopy and the 2 signatures in a funeral guest book were all my mother ever needed from me. On March 11th of that year, a document was created that says, I, Dana Whitlock, freely and voluntarily gave up any claim to my grandmother's estate. It is called a disclaimer of interest. In plain words, it is a give-away paper. It is the piece of paper an heir signs to say, whatever was left to me, I refuse it. Pass it to the next person in line, and the next person in line under the will, was my mother. I did not know that document existed. I would not know for 10 years. On the day it was supposedly signed, witnessed, and stamped in Grand Rapids, I was 7 hours away, buying packing tape. Hold that thought. We're going back to the family now, because you need to see how the next 3.5 years worked. And you need to see it the way I saw it. Which is to say, not at all. The house on Alder Street did not sit empty. About 8 months after Grandma died, tenants moved in, a young couple, then later, a family with a trampoline. When I asked my mother about it, she had the answer ready before I finished the question. The bank controls the house. She said, we manage it for them. The rent goes toward the debt. It barely covers the shortfall. That is why we all still chip in. She said it in the same tone she used at the brokerage when a closing fell through. Regretful, brisk, already moving on. I drove past the house. Sometimes, I am not proud of how often. I would slow down at the corner and look at Grandma's porch and the hydrangeas the tenants never watered. And I would touch the brass key on my keyring at red lights the way some people touch a cross. I thought I was holding on to a memory. I did not know. I was holding on to evidence. Here is what those years actually looked like. From inside my green book, $400 a month. Every month, from a front desk paycheck. There were months. I skipped a dentist appointment at the dental office, where I literally worked, because I could not cover my share of my own mouth. There was a Christmas, I gave everyone candles. And every family dinner, twice a month at my mother's table, ran on the same script. Marcus's business got the toasts. Marcus's new van got passed around on a phone. When Marcus needed a tool trailer, the family found the money the way weather finds a picnic. Suddenly, and from nowhere in particular. And when I mentioned, once, that my car needed brakes, my mother set down the serving spoon and said, we all have hard months, Dana. Then she looked around the table and said it again. The motto, the family anthem. We keep it in the family. If you have ever sat at a table like that, where the same word, family, meant obligation, when it pointed at you, and generosity when it pointed at someone else, you know exactly what I mean, and you know how long it can take to see it. It took me 3.5 years, and one sheet of paper sliding across a table. I want to give you one more moment from those years, because I nearly caught her once, and I need you to see how close nearly is to never. About 2 years after Grandma died, so a 1.5 years or so before the night I walked out, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off my monthly transfer confirmation, because she liked things printed. She was that kind of office manager. She was in the garden. On the kitchen counter, on top of the mail pile, sat an envelope from the county treasurer. A property tax bill. I was not snooping. It was face up, and the property line read 214 Alder Street. And the name above the address was Carol Whitlock. I stood there holding my own printed proof of payment, and looked at hers. And here is the thing I did not know then, and know painfully well now. Banks that hold a house for debt do not get their tax bills addressed to your mother. Tax bills go to owners. That envelope was the entire truth, sitting in the open, next to the fruit bowl. But I was 25, and I had a motto where my questions should have been. So when she came in from the garden, I asked about the envelope, and she took it off the pile without hurrying and said, oh, the county sends everything to whoever manages the property, sweetheart. It is a paperwork thing, and she slid it into a drawer. And I helped her carry in the tomatoes, a paperwork thing. She said it to the one daughter, who would grow up to read paperwork for a living. Hold on to that envelope. Years later, at a table by a courthouse window, it came back to me all at once. and it was one of the angriest 30 seconds of my life. We have arrived at the night itself. The night everything in this story counts forward, from, and backward to. It was a Sunday in October, 3 years and 9 months after Grandma died. I can tell you what was on the table because I have replayed this dinner more times than any other 2 hours of my life. Pot roast. The good tablecloth. My brother and his wife on one side, their daughter, my niece, 4 years old then, drawing on a paper napkin, my mother at the head. And next to my mother's plate, a manila folder, squared up with the edge of the table. The way she squared paperwork at the brokerage, before a client walked in, I noticed the folder, the way you notice a wasp, in the room. You keep eating. You keep track of it. Dessert came out at 7:30. At 7:40, my mother slid the folder past the pie plates and set it in front of me, and she put a pen on top of it. And she said, "Before you head out, sweetheart, we need your signature on something." Inside was a loan guarantee. In plain words, a promise to the bank that if my brother's business ever stopped paying its loan, I would pay it instead. Marcus was expanding. A third van, a real shop, a business loan just under $90,000. And the bank wanted another name on the hook, my name. My mother explained it, the way she explained everything. As settled fact, awaiting my cooperation. It is a formality, Dana. Marcus would do it for you. Family doesn't say no to family. We keep it in the family. I was actually reaching for the pen. I want to be honest about that. 26 years of training does not evaporate because you smell smoke. I was reaching for the pen, and then I read the loan application under the guarantee page. Because the Green Book had made me a person who reads what she signs. And on the second line of that application, in the box marked business address, it said 214 Alder Street, Grandma's house. The house the bank supposedly controlled. The house whose rent supposedly barely covered the shortfall I had been feeding $400 a month for 44 months. My brother's business was registered at that address. You do not register a company at a property. A bank is squeezing for debt. You register it at a property. Your family controls. The room got very quiet inside my head and very loud outside it. And I heard myself ask one question: why is your business at Grandma's house? And I watched my mother and my brother trade a look over the pot roast. One single look, the kind of look that has a whole language behind it. And my mother said, "That is just an address on a form. Dana, sign the page." I did not sign the page. I asked a second question, and my voice was steadier than I felt. Who has the paperwork for Grandma's estate? I would like to see the debts. My mother put down her fork, and her face did something I had seen once or twice before. At the brokerage, when a deal was slipping, the warmth left it in an orderly fashion, like staff leaving a building in a drill. "You owe this family," she said. "Everything you have came through this family, and you want to see paperwork." Marcus stared at his plate. His wife took my niece into the living room, and I remember being grateful to her for that. I stood up. I took my coat off the back of the chair. My keys were in my coat pocket, and the brass key was on the ring. And I closed my hand around all of it, and I said, the only thing I had. "Then the family can cover my share from now on." I walked out the front door at 7:55 in the evening, and the storm door swung shut behind me. and no one came out on the porch. 44 payments. $17,600. That was the last dollar, and the last dinner. I drove home with my hand around my keys at every red light, and I did not cry. And I want you to remember that too. Because in this whole story, I am going to cry exactly once, and it is not tonight. And when it happens, you will understand why. 6 weeks after I walked out, I lost the job at the dental office. The practice sold, the new owners brought their own front desk, and suddenly I was 26, with no family, no savings, because the savings had gone out $400 at a time, and a riskum. With one job on it. If you have ever started over with nothing but a notebook full of proof that you did everything right. This next part is yours. The listing said file clerk, records department, a title agency downtown. I did not know what a title agency was. I found out it is the place that checks before anyone buys a house, that the seller actually owns it, that the signatures are real, that the stamps are valid, that nobody in the chain of ownership was cheated or forged or skipped. I sat in the interview, and a woman named Ruth looked at my one job resim for a long time. Ruth was 60 then, a senior title examiner, reading glasses on a beaded chain. The kind of person who has seen every way a signature can lie. She asked me why I wanted the job. And because I was too broke to perform, I told her something true. I said, my grandmother wrote everything down, and I write everything down, and I would rather work somewhere that thinks that matters. Ruth hired me on a Tuesday. She trained me the way you train a stonemason, one brick, one rule. And a few months in, on a lunch break, she noticed my keyring on the table and the little brass key on it, worn smooth. Obviously going to no lock in my current life. I told her the short version. Grandmother's house key. Grandmother gone. House gone to old debts. I keep it to keep her. Ruth took off her reading glasses, and she said, the sentence I have carried ever since. The one I will remember for the rest of my life. A key is not a keepsake. Dana, a key is a claim. Somebody gave you that for a reason, and paper never forgets the reason. People do the forgetting for it. Then she put her glasses back on and went back to her sandwich. Because Ruth never chased a moment. She just left it where you could reach it. The next 5 years I will give you the way they deserve to be given. Fast, because you already know I survive them. And survival is errands. What matters is what I became. File clerk to title searcher in 1 year. Searcher to licensed examiner in 3. I took the state course at night at a community college with a parking lot bigger than the campus. I learned to read a chain of title the way other people read a family tree, and I learned the anatomy of a forged document. Because catching them was now my job. I learned that a notary stamp, that little round seal, exists to prove one thing only, that the signer was physically in the room, in person, on that date. I learned that notary commissions expire on a fixed date. Like milk. I learned that when 2 signatures match too perfectly, sitting on top of each other like tracing paper, that is not consistency. That is copying, because no human being signs their own name identically twice. Every one of those facts went into my head. As a work skill, every one of them was quietly loading a gun. I did not know I owned 2 habits from the old life. Came with me. I still kept a green book, a new one, each January, every bill, every deposit. And Ruth teased me for it exactly once, and then started calling it my second brain. And I still had the search alert. Years earlier, in a sad hour I never told anyone about, I had saved an alert on a real estate site for one address. 214 Alder Street. The way you leave a porch light on for someone who is not coming back. It never sent me anything. The tenants changed. The trampoline rusted. The alert stayed silent for years. My mother, in all that time, called me on birthdays and left voicemails that managed to be both brief and disappointed. Marcus sent a text every Christmas. I answered the ones from his wife, because his wife would send pictures of my niece. And my niece had done nothing to anyone. That was the whole family, held at the exact distance, where it could not reach my bank account. I thought that was the ending. I thought distance was the win. Then, on a Thursday morning in March, 6.5 years after I walked out of that kitchen, my phone lit up on my desk at work with an alert I had forgotten I ever set. New listing. New Thou Ind, 214. Alder Street, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, charming post-war bungalow. Priced at $240,000. Listed by the brokerage, where my mother had worked for 30 years. I want you to sit in my chair for 1 second. I examine titles. It is 9:15 in the morning. Coffee's going cold next to 2 monitors. And the house that the bank supposedly took, the house whose debts I helped pay with 44 months of my 20s, is on the open market. Staged, photographed, with a granite countertop where Grandma's coffee can of screws used to sit. Banks do not stage bungalows through your mother's brokerage. Owners do. And a memory I had filed away for 8 years came back so hard I heard it. A tax envelope on a counter, face up, next to a fruit bowl addressed to Carol Whitlock. A paperwork thing. She had called it. Somebody owned that house. Somebody had been getting its tax bill at her own kitchen for years. And for the first time in 10 years, I asked the question I had been raised never to ask. Who? Here is where I have to be careful with you and careful with the truth, because this part matters. I did not use my job to investigate my own family. I want to be completely clear. The moment I realized this could touch my employer, I walked into Ruth's office, told her the address, told her my mother's name, and told her that if any order involving that property or that brokerage ever came through our agency, I could not be anywhere near it. That is called a conflict of interest, and declaring it is not just ethics. It is survival, because everything I was about to find would one day need to stand up in a courtroom. And nothing stands up in a courtroom if you cheated to find it. Ruth listened, nodded once, and said, "Good girl." Then she said, "You don't need the office anyway. Probate files are public. Anyone with $12 and a lunch hour can read one." So on my own time, with my own $12, I drove to the county courthouse and requested the probate file for the estate of Evelyn Whitlock. A probate file, in plain words, is the folder a court keeps when someone dies. The will, the debts, the list of what they owned, and who got it. Every page of it is public. It had been sitting there, open to anyone on earth, for 10 years. The only person it was ever hidden from was me. And it was hidden the old-fashioned way, with a story and a motto. The clerk handed me a folder about 1/2 inch thick. I carried it to a table, by the window, and I am going to walk you through that folder 1 page at a time, exactly the way it happened to me, because it happened in 3 blows, and each one was worse than the last. Page 1 was the petition, the form that opens an estate, filed by Carol Whitlock, personal representative, which in plain words means the person in charge. Fine. Expect. Tef, page 4, was the will. The last will and testament of Evelyn Whitlock, signed in September, a year and 4 months before she died. Prepared by an estate attorney, whose office is still 4 blocks from my work. I call it the September will. It is 1 page long, and my grandmother's voice is all over it. Small gifts to the church, her sewing machine to a neighbor, and then the third paragraph. I give my home at 2014 Alder Street, together with its contents, to my granddaughter, Dana Evelyn Whitlock. My knees actually moved the table. She left me the house, not the family, not my mother. Me, by name, first and last, and the middle name I was given in her honor. There was no tangle of debts in that paragraph. There was a grandmother, a granddaughter, and a door, and she had handed me the key to it 9 years before she died, at her kitchen table, and told me exactly what it was for. So you always have somewhere to go. I turned the pages with a steady hand, because a title examiner's hands stay steady. That is the job, and I found blow number 2 by finding nothing. Every estate file has a section for creditor claims. The place where anyone the dead person owed money has a few months to stand up and say so. Grandma's creditor section was 1 page, 0. Claims filed, 0. No medical bills. No bank. No back taxes. In 10 years. Not one human being or institution ever told that court my grandmother owed them $1. The debts I paid $400 a month to settle. The shortfall, the whole story. None of it ever existed anywhere, except across my mother's kitchen table. 44 months. $17,600. That is not a number, to me. That is every skip dentist appointment. That is the Christmas of candles. That is 4 years of my 20s handed over in monthly installments to a debt that lived only in my mother's mouth. And then page 19. Blow. Number 3, a single sheet stamped by the court in March, 2 months after Grandma died. Disclaimer of interest. The give away paper. I, Dana Whitlock, being an heir of the estate, do hereby irrevocably renounce and disclaim any and all interest. And there, on the signature line, in ink, was my name, my signature, or something wearing it. Signed, according to the paper, in Grand Rapids, on March 11th, in front of a notary, whose round stamp sat next to it looking official, as a courthouse column. I sat by that window, and I did what I do 40 hours a week. For strangers, I examined it. And the document made 3 mistakes. And I found all 3 in under 2 minutes. And I am going to give them to you the way I gave them to my lawyer. Mistake 1. The signature reads, Dana Marie Whitlock. My legal middle name is Evelyn. It is on my birth certificate, my license, and the 3rd paragraph of my grandmother's will. My mother had lobbied against that name before I was born. She thought it was old-fashioned, and she lost. And 30 years later, reconstructing her daughter from memory, she wrote the name she had wanted instead of the name I have. Mistake 2. I know that signature. It is not similar to mine. It is identical to mine. Identical the way a photocopy is identical. And I knew within 1 page flip where the original lived, a funeral guest book, where a grieving 23-year-old was told the pen had skipped. Sign it again, nice and clear, one above the other, 2 clean copies of my signature, delivered to my mother by my own hand at my grandmother's funeral. Mistake 3 was the stamp. Every notary stamp shows the date. The commission expires. This one expired on January 31st of that year. The document was stamped March 11th. The seal that exists to prove I was in the room was itself legally dead by 6 weeks. When it touched the paper, the notary, by the way, worked at my mother's brokerage, 3 desks from my mother, for 11 years. Nothing about this crime was sophisticated. It did not have to be. It only had to survive one condition: that I never, ever look. She built the whole thing on the one thing she trusted most, not the forger down the hall, my obedience. I photographed every page with my phone, in order, twice. I returned the folder to the clerk and thanked her. I walked to my car in the county lot, level 2, gray light, and I got in and locked the doors, and that is where it happened. The once. I cried in that parking structure for a long time, alone, with both hands on the wheel of a parked car, not for the money. And I need you to understand this part. I cried because for 10 years I had grieved my grandmother at the wrong distance, driving past a house I thought was taken from all of us equally, when the truth was that she had reached out of her last year of life to hand me a home. And my mother had stood between us and quietly closed her hand. The theft of the house I could put a number on. The theft of the gift of 10 years of knowing I was that loved. There is no line in any ledger for that. Then I wiped my face, opened my green book to a clean page, and started a list titled Next Steps. If this story has put a knot in your chest, if somebody once counted on you, never looking, do me one favor, at this exact moment. Tap the like, not for me, for the version of you that finally looked, and stay here, because everything you have been waiting for is on the other side of that list. Here is what cold looks like. In case you have never had the privilege of watching it work, cold is not slow. Cold is not passive. Cold is a to-do list executed in order, while everyone assumes you are still crying in a parking structure. Item 1. Within a week, I hired an estate attorney, a real one, with my own money, a woman recommended by, of all people, the same law office, 4 blocks from my work, whose founder had written Grandma's will. I brought her 3 things in one canvas bag: the photographs of the probate file, my old Chicago receipts, the certified mail slip, and the roommate who would swear on anything that I spent that entire March week on Ashland Avenue, and the green books. All of them, back to the first one, 44 entries reading Grandma's debts, $400, in the handwriting of a girl who thought she was doing the right thing. My attorney went through the folder page by page without a word, and when she reached the disclaimer, she took off her glasses in a way that reminded me of Ruth. And she said, "In 14 years, I have never had a client walk in with a case already built." I told her the truth. I said, "I have been building it since I was 23. I just didn't know who it was for." Item 2, and this part was my request, against no one's advice, because my attorney understood it immediately. Before we filed anything, we gave my mother one meeting, not for her sake, for mine and for the record, because I wanted it on paper that she was offered the quiet exit, the private correction, the very thing her motto claimed to want. We keep it in the family. Fine. Here was her one chance to actually do that. The meeting happened at my attorney's office on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. My mother arrived in her closing day blazer with Marcus one step behind her, and she walked in already performing relief. "Sweetheart, finally, this silliness. We can fix anything as a family." She reached out to squeeze my hand. I did not move my hand. I had 7 index cards and I had practiced, and I read them in order. And I did not raise my voice one time, because I had learned from watching her that the most frightening sound in the world is a person who is not upset. 1. On page 4 of Grandma's probate file, is her will. It leaves the house on Alder Street to me. By name. 2. On page 19 is a disclaimer of my inheritance, dated March 11th. A week I can prove I spent in Chicago. 3. The signature on it says Dana Marie. My middle name is Evelyn. You, of all people, know that. 4. The signature is a traced copy of the funeral guest book. You had me sign. Twice. 5. The notary stamp on it expired on January 31st, 6 weeks before it was used, and the notary sat 3 desks from yours for 11 years. 6. The creditor page of the estate is empty. There were never any debts. I paid you $17,600 for nothing, and you collected rent on my house for 10 years. 7. You have 10 days to sign the house back to me and account for the rent. If you do, this stays in this room. You always said, we keep it in the family. Prove you meant it. The silence after index card 7 lasted long enough for the wall clock to become the loudest thing in the room. Marcus had gone the color of unpainted drywall somewhere around card 4, and he was looking at our mother in a way I recognized, because it was the way I used to look at her, like a man doing arithmetic on his entire childhood. My mother's face performed 3 emotions in order: wounded, then patient, then, when neither landed, the flat one, and she said, and I will quote her exactly for the rest of my life, that house was always going to stay in this family. Your grandmother was old. You were a child. I made a decision. Somebody had to. And then she stood up, straightened her blazer, and delivered the exit line she had clearly written in the car. Families do not take each other to court. My attorney, who had not spoken in 20 minutes, said, then, this will be a very short case. 10 days came. 10 days went. On day 11, we filed. Now let me show you what the paperwork she worshipped does when it finally turns around. We filed a petition to reopen the estate and set aside the disclaimer as a forgery. And the same afternoon, my attorney recorded something called a lis pendens on the house. Plain words. It is a public flag on the property record that says this house is in a lawsuit. Buy it at your own risk. Remember, the house was listed for sale, staged granite and all, at $240,000. There was a young couple in escrow, meaning their money was already sitting with a neutral company, waiting for closing day, when the buyer's title company ran its final check, not my company. I was a locked door away from all of it. That flag lit up the file like a road flare. The sale died in one phone call. The couple walked and got every dollar back, and I was glad, because they were the only innocent people in that building. The listing came down. On a Friday, my mother had told half the brokerage. She was selling her late mother's bungalow to fund her retirement. Now the whole office, an office full of people whose entire career is reading property records, wanted to know why, the file said. The bungalow might not be hers. Sometimes the consequence is not the courtroom. Sometimes the consequence is the break room. The notary went next, and I want to be precise. Because I did not do this, the system did, which was the entire point. A forged notarization is not office sloppiness. It is the one sin the state does not forgive a notary. So once the filing named her stamp, she had a choice between a fraud investigation and the truth. She chose the truth. Her sworn statement, and it is in the court file where anyone can read it, said that for years around the office she had notarized documents in batches, as favors, without the signers present, and that Carol from the front office would bring her paperwork already signed, and she stamped where Carol pointed. She surrendered her commission. The brokerage, which cannot exist for 1 week without valid notarizations, let her go. And then it did the arithmetic on its office manager of 30 years. The woman who brought the batches, and it let my mother go too. Quietly, of course. They keep things in the family. Over there. Then the handwriting expert hired by the court, not by me, filed a report I could have written myself. And there was one line in it that I have read more times than any poem. The 2 question signatures exhibit a degree of correspondence, not found in genuine writings. In plain words, real people never sign identically twice. Copies do. The disclaimer signature sat on top of the funeral guest book signature, like a window decal. The judge, in February, a little over 7 years after the night, I walked out of that kitchen, signed an order that runs 2 pages and undoes 10 years. The disclaimer, void, the estate, reopened. The house at 2014 Alder Street, mine. By deed, the way my grandmother wrote it in September, in her own steady hand. And one more thing. The thing my green book had been waiting its whole life for, an accounting. My mother had collected rent on that house for 126 months, $1,300 a month. On average, for 10.5 years, at $163,800. Hear that the way I heard it in the courtroom, that is more than 3 years of my full-time salary. That is a college fund. That is the retirement she was selling my inheritance to pay for. The judgment for it, plus my $17,600, is entered against her. And until she satisfies it, there is a lien, a legal hold, sitting on the deed of her own house. The house with the kitchen table, where all of this was decided. She spent 10 years renting out my property. I now hold paper against hers. I did not raise my voice. Once to get there, I filled out forms. Correctly. In order. What to? Like she taught me without meaning to. You would think a 2-page court order would end a person. Like my mother, it did not. It escalated her, and I am going to walk you through the escalation, because if you have ever set a boundary with someone who has never once heard the word, no survive contact with her, you already know the shape of what came next, and you deserve to watch it fail in real time. First came the phone. 11 voicemails in the first month after the ruling. I saved every one. A habit now, and they run in a perfect arc. The early ones were furious. Clipped, you have humiliated this family. The middle ones were wounded. I am your mother. Whatever you think I did. And the late ones, the ones after her lawyer presumably explained what a lien is, were soft as pudding. Sweetheart, let's sit down. Just us girls. We can settle this privately. Not one of the 11. And I have listened, contains the word sorry. Not one contains the word forged. In my mother's version, delivered to my voicemail in installments, a court simply happened to her. The way weather happens. I answered none of them. Then she came to my work. On a Wednesday, 12:40 in the afternoon, my mother walked into the lobby of the title agency in the closing day blazer and told the receptionist she was there to see her daughter about a family matter. I did not go down. Ruth went down. Ruth, who is 67 now and has the bedside manner of a filing cabinet, walked my mother to the door with a hand that did not quite touch her elbow, and according to the receptionist, said exactly one sentence on the way. In this building, ma'am, believe the documents. My mother has not been back. Last came the letter, and the letter is where this story closes its own circle. So listen close, 4 handwritten pages, and I did read this one. Once, standing at my kitchen counter. 4 pages of her side. The sacrifices of motherhood. The ingratitude of daughters. Marcus's struggles. Somehow. And in the final paragraph, in underlined ink, the family motto, deployed one last time like a court of appeal. We keep it in the family, Dana. We always have. That is all I ever did. I sat down that night and I wrote back the only reply she will ever get from me. One line, on a note card. In the clear, careful signature that only I can write. You are right. Mom, we keep it. In the family, the house is staying with the granddaughter. It was left to. I signed it Dana Evelyn Whitlock. Full legal name, middle name and all. And I mailed it certified. Because the Green Book made me a person who keeps receipts. And this receipt I framed. I want to tell you what I did not get, because this channel does not sell fairy tales. It sells the truth. And the truth is a smaller, sturdier thing. I did not get a family. There was no tearful reunion. On a porch. My mother is 66 years old, and to this day, as far as I know, she has told no one, including herself, the true story. Marcus and I do not speak, not out of war, but out of a silence with too much arithmetic in it, because he watched me pay for debts he must have known were fog, and he registered his business at my house. And some math a brother cannot come back from. But his wife texted me in March on her own, and it said, June asks about her Aunt Dana. She did nothing. Can she still have you? And that is the one thread I kept. My niece is 11. Now, she comes over some Saturdays. She thinks the coffee can of loose screws I keep on the counter is hilarious. It is Grandma's can. She does not know that yet. She will. And I got the house. The tenant's lease ran out in May, and on the first Saturday in June, I stood on the porch of 2014 Alder Street with a paper cup of coffee and my keyring in my hand. 10 years of landlords had changed that lock twice over, so the court order came with new keys. Shiny, correct. Legal. I did not use them. Not first. First, I took the brass key off my ring, the one Grandma folded into my 14-year-old hand, the one I rubbed smooth at a decade of red lights, and I slid it into a locket no longer fit. And I held it there for a second, and that was enough. There is a particular quiet that comes from finally standing somewhere you were told. Your whole life, you had no right to stand. The street was full of it. Then I opened my door with my new key and walked into my house. One more thing was waiting for me, and I did not see it coming. And I have saved it for you until the very end, clearing the attic in a box the tenants and the years had missed, wedged behind the chimney brick. I found notebooks. Green ones, drugstore ones, 3 at a time ones. In my grandmother's handwriting, going back decades, her ledgers. Every borrowed dollar, every returned favor, just like I remembered. And the last notebook had entries about me. Dana cut the hedge, would not take gas money. Dana drove me to the eye doctor. Used her sick day, told me it was a day off. Dana, kitchen table today. Gave her the key, line after line, year after year. My grandmother had been keeping the ledger I never knew I was in. All those years I kept a green book to track a debt that turned out to be a lie. She had been keeping one the whole time to track a debt that turned out to be real. The one she owed me. In her accounting, for showing up. The last entry is dated the September she signed her will, and it is 4 words long, and it settles every account in this story. The house, paid in full. So here is where I leave you. My mother taught me that family is a debt you are born into and pay forever. My grandmother taught me, 20 years apart, in 2 installments, a key and a will, that family is a claim you are given, and a door they cannot both be right. I spent $17,600 learning the difference, and I would tell you it was worth it. Except that it was never my bill. The people who love you. Write it down. That is the whole secret. Not the loud ones at the head of the table. The quiet ones with the drugstore notebooks. The ones keeping honest count of who kept showing up. Find your people who write it down. And if somebody once handed you a key and told you that you would always have somewhere to go, hear me. It was never a keepsake. It was a claim. Go. Claim it. If this story found you at the right time, share it with the one person who needs to hear that last line. And if you have been that family member, the counted on and never counted, put the word owed in the comments so the others can find you. I read everyone. I am Dana. I live at 214 Alder Street. The porch light is mine now, and it works, and it is on.